So 25 years after they went for him the first time to replace Brian Clough as manager, Nottingham Forest have finally secured Martin O'Neill as their new boss in probably the biggest football story really to hit us all year. And we're joined on the line by local journalist Daniel Storey, who can help fill us in on the reaction over there. Daniel, are you as shocked as we are over here in Ireland with this news?
I am slightly shocked, yeah. Martin has been linked with a Nottingham Forest job pretty much every time. Him and Nigel Clough tend to be linked in the kind of second wave of appointments. If the first choice doesn't come off, we then hear those names come in, and he's always stayed away from it very deliberately. He's always talked about Brian Clough's influence, but for whatever reason, it's just not worked out. It does seem a slightly strange time for it to happen now. He's not managed in the Football League since 1996, and it's going to be really interesting to see how he gets on. But there are a number of problems at Nottingham Forest that go way above and beyond the managerial position, and that's something that Martin's going to have to contend with.
What are they?
It's a club that's a kind of a monument to short-termism. We've had 10 managers in 8 years. We've had numerous directors of football and heads of recruitment and a huge turnover in players. We've had 3 owners in the last 9 years. And this is all geared towards getting the club back to where it considers its rightful place, which is in the Premier League. But it hasn't been in the Premier League for 20 years. It's a big club by reputation, but it's not a big club by current or recent performance. And the suspicion is that the owners will throw money and throw big decisions at the problem until it eventually comes off. And actually, the Championship has shown in recent years that it takes a bit more than that. It takes a bit more nous. It takes a bit more faith and patience and savviness. And that's not something that Forest have had over the last few years.
There seems to be suggestion that the board wasn't all that happy with Karanka's style of football there, which had to make us, certainly a lot of us, laugh over here, obviously being fresh from the calamity that was the Ireland style of football over the last few years. But what do you make of that?
Yeah, it's certainly a concern, and it's absolutely right. It was one of the owner's most prevalent concerns was that Karanka's style of football was not what it was. It should be said that Aitor Karanka was very well backed in the transfer market, and that he did suffer a number of pretty humbling defeats, particularly at home. And I know the owners looked at the likes of Norwich and Leeds, and they reckoned that Nottingham Forest had a stronger squad than both of those teams, and they're probably right. But yeah, Martin O'Neill is going to have to change certainly what he was doing at Ireland in the last 2 years in charge, because if they want to see expansive football, then that's really not his forte. It should also be said that the style of football becomes a pretty handy excuse when results aren't going right. If Martin O'Neill wins his first 7 or 8 games in charge, very quickly the concerns about the football, I'm sure, will die down. But yeah, we are not going to see the expansive football that Evangelos Marinakis has demanded from previous managers. That's pretty certain.
Kev, this reminds me a bit of Kenny Dalglish getting the Liverpool job, in that there was so much emotion involved and it was like nostalgia laden. And I think, as somebody for us also with Liverpool, I really wanted it to work, and maybe it didn't work in the end, but certainly I would be very, very sceptical about O'Neill's suitability for club management at this stage of his career.
Well, I don't know. I think his club record in England, certainly at lower level, is excellent. And again, Daniel's touched on something there. It was a long time ago when he managed over in England, when he's managed at club level there. But in general, he has got an excellent record. And I think if you look at what he did at Wycombe, what he did at Leicester, in getting them both promoted out of lower leagues into the next division above, and then, of course, securing Leicester as a Premier League club, I think that's something that certainly goes in his favour. The one thing I wanted just to ask Daniel was in relation to Martin O'Neill's relationship with Ellis Short at Sunderland. It seems to me like the ownership of Forest is quite similar to that of Sunderland, where there's actually a little bit more hands-on approach actually from Forest than there was at Sunderland. But how's that relationship going to work? How do you think Martin O'Neill is going to handle that type of I don't know, maybe hothead, I think, as well, because as you say, with the amount of changes that he's made, he does make decisions maybe quite rashly, I think, at times as well.
Yeah, it's worth pointing out that Evangelos Marinakis was the only person that our previous owner, Fawaz Al-Hassawi, would sell to, and I think that speaks volumes. The club have put a better structure in place. There is middlemen between owner and manager. There is a chairman who is more hands-on, and the club are doing a lot more than they ever used to under Al-Hassawi to bring the fans close to the club. You can tell that in the attendances. Most home games are sellouts. But yes, one of the slight leaks from the Karanka camp post his sacking was that he felt that there was undue pressure from Marinakis to particularly play Arvin Apaya, a young winger who the club have high hopes for. And Karanka thought that there was pressure to play him, and he didn't play him that much, and that was viewed to be a part of the reason he was sacked. Yeah, he left the club.
But he is Martin O'Neill, very, very strong character. So if that sort of relationship, or if Martin O'Neill is being told who he should be playing, then you can only see it going one way from the off, can't you?
You can, although it should be said that perhaps that strength of character is what an owner like Marinakis needs. Yeah. I don't think there's any doubt that they've appointed Martin O'Neill because of his history at Forest. Now, that goes without saying. The statement the club released today said, we want him. He's one of our miracle men, and we want him to get us back and try and achieve that miracle again. To me, that's it's incredibly fanciful. We've seen the Leicester dream over the last few years, but Nottingham Forest are not going to do that. What we need to do is move forward sustainably and potentially slowly to get where we feel we should be, which is basically a bottom half Premier League team. O'Neill might well be for the man for that, but to appoint someone on their previous history, that slightly sticks in my throat, because I think we need to appoint a manager who is focused purely on the job in hand. Forget everything else. O'Neill might well be the man for that job, but we need to do it on that rather than anything else. And to my mind, the club have appointed him because it's a good PR thing to do. They think the fans will get on side. The last guy did it with Stuart Pearce, and that worked badly. Stuart Pearce had enough about him and with his reputation that it was never going to be dampened by what happened at Forest. I'm not sure O'Neill does, so this kind of needs to work for both.
You spoke about PR there, because O'Neill, has probably been on a bit of a PR offensive since he got let go from the Ireland job, and his reputation over here was very badly bruised by, also rumours just about kind of maybe a lack of preparation for teams Ireland were playing against, but also the fact that he'd really, basically inculcated in the team a system or a belief that they couldn't play football. But we have the impression over here that he's been on maybe something of a charm offensive with English journalists, and maybe his reputation over there is slightly loftier still.
I think it probably is loftier here, and speaking to a number of supporters today, it's certainly loftier amongst Nottingham Forest supporters than it would be at any other club in our position, I think. He does have the advantage that he has a very large, strong squad that's pretty top heavy with attackers. So if he can bring a solidity to the defence and kind of let the attack do their thing, then maybe that works. But as you say, he's got to do an awful lot from the last 2 years at Ireland to change the perception of a kind of dour safety first manager, because that's exactly what the accusation was that Aitor Karanka was. Yeah,
you mentioned the squad there as well, and so there's one or two familiar names that we would recognise. Daryl Murphy will be one that we would recognise of here instantly. But what about the rest of the squad then in general? Do you think that squad is capable of having a serious challenge then for a top two maybe beyond them just now, but certainly top six before the end of the season? I'm sure that's Martin O'Neill's remit now.
Yeah, and it should be. There's a whole host of central midfielders. Jack Colback's got Premier League experience. Claudio Jacob has. Adlin Guediora has. Ben Watson has. There's plenty in central midfield. They signed 3 Portuguese players last summer, one of which, João Carvalho, cost £15 million. The other 2 are on loan deals with potential permanent signings at the end of the season if they go up. As well as Daryl Murphy, they've got Lewis Graben, who's one of the top scorers in the division. There is still, the influence of the youth academy, which, despite everything and despite Forest's best efforts, has continued to flourish in recent years. And they've got some decent central defenders, but from the outside, it looks a bloated squad, and it looks a squad that was low on motivation.
And that's one thing. In fairness to O'Neill, you can imagine there'll be a very quick return in terms of he will get them firing again.
Yeah, and all the talk is that Roy Keane will perhaps, unsurprisingly, given his relationship with O'Neill and his history at Forest, will come in as assistant, and they do strike as a kind of bad cop duo. So yes, there will be heads banged together in that change room. And again, speaking to supporters, some think that's that might well be the best thing for them, because there's plenty of talent in that squad.
I just find this very perplexing, though. So both of their reputations were so badly dented by the Irish thing, possibly Keane even more than O'Neill, and yet Forest seemingly think it's a good idea to put what would be deemed a failed managerial duo back at it, but is still a relatively big club. I don't know, Kev. I think it's a gamble.
It's the history of the club, though, isn't it? Simply, I mean, Roy Keane himself has been linked with that job several times in the last 10 years. I think.
But his managerial currency's in bits at the moment.
Well, yes, well, maybe you say that, but I think there are still people willing to take a chance on that character, that name. It's still a huge name within the world of football. We know that, and that's what a lot of owners, a lot of people within clubs do see that as maybe something that Daniel's touched on there. It's a huge PR coup for Forest, essentially, to get O'Neill, and particularly getting Roy Keane in alongside him. That's the way it is. Again, you say his reputation could have been damaged over. It probably was. It has been damaged here. But over there, his reputation is still as high as ever.
And Daniel, what will the reaction be at the City Ground when, you know, you have your first game against Wigan and you have potentially these two guys coming in? You just imagine there's this groundswell of emotion.
Yeah, there will be. We all remember Stuart Pearce's homecoming, and it won't be as emotional as that. But it will be the club, when they tweeted out their statement, did it with the hashtag Welcome Home Martin. So they're very much trying to capture that sense of homecoming, and they do honestly believe that swell of goodwill might give Forest an initial bump that they need to get back in the playoff picture. And I think they probably look at something like, it's a very different situation, but something like Solskjaer at Manchester United, and Karanka's exit has very much has links to Jose Mourinho's exit, in that there was a sense that the players weren't really playing for him, and that everyone had kind of accepted this sort of mediocrity of performance. And I think they probably hope for the same, that someone can come in with a bit of history at the club, can say, look, you know what this club should be doing, you know how we can play, you know how you can play, let's just go out there and do it. Now, I don't think O'Neill is as tactically ambitious and open as Solskjaer, but if he gives the same message, then it's easy to see how potentially quite quickly it could snowball.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, has the game passed him by to an extent? You've Bielsa now doing his thing in that division. You mentioned Wickham and Leicester. That's a long time ago.
Yeah, it's probably true, but I think he's certainly his history in the game. I mean, I'd be one more of, look, if you've got it and you have done it in the past, then there is still certainly a job in the game for you. Whether or not the Forest job has been a difficult job over a number of years now. If he can get it turned around, we know Forest as a huge club should be, or essentially, there's a number of clubs that think they probably Leeds and Norwich and West Brom, I suppose, as well, that think the Premier League clubs. Forest are in that bracket. Sheffield Wednesday is another one. So I think in general they're a huge club. Martin O'Neill gives them the bounce and they get rocking straight away. Who's to say that they can't go on and do that? I wouldn't rule it out. I think that's harsh to say, John, myself, to say that the game's passed him by.
Potentially.
No, I just think in general, I think there is still a place for him. I do think that. Given what he's done in the past, I think sometimes, yes, it did go very, very sour here, and we know that. It was everything went sour about the performances, about the lack of goals, particularly the home performance. We weren't getting any spark at the Aviva at all. But his reputation is still, I would think, very, very good. I feel it's very, very good. And he's got a history of getting sides who are in lesser positions, certainly in higher leagues. That's his reputation. That's what he's done. It
does, Daniel, look a perfect fit for O'Neill at the moment. Obviously, he was linked with Stoke. Personally, I would have been a little bit surprised if he got a Premier League job. This couldn't basically be the best option available to him, and perfect in so many ways.
Yeah, and it's also worth saying that with the kind of the ownership, not debacle is the wrong word, but the kind of uneasiness and upheaval around the club, and this kind of, as I say, monument to short-termism, it's worth pointing out that if it does go badly and goes badly quickly, there is a fairly handy excuse there with the situation at Forest, that O'Neill would very reasonably be able to say, well, exactly as Karanka will, and say, look, I'm still a good manager. It just didn't work in that position because of the situation the club was in at that point. And if that happens, I think he needed a championship job. He needed a championship job, and he needed a club down on its luck that he could take forward. But I think Forest is good for him, because if it doesn't work out, he's got a kind of handy, well, look, if you give me the right tools and the right situation, I still can do a job.
Yeah, I just wanted to go to you on that point there, Daniel, in relation to Karanka. Karanka was 7th in the table. was it about a month ago now, the suggestion was that, look, he's not in the top 6, he's under serious pressure. Now, I know there was another more element, or a number of elements around that, but if Martin O'Neill is falling mid-table, or he's not necessarily getting the results, will he be given this season? Is it a long-term plan, or just a short-term fix for him to go into the club now?
I don't think anything has been a long-term plan over the last 7-8 years. We've had too many managers for that, and it's happened too often that there can be no coincidence that it affects those managers. I think what they're searching for is a manager who can get that new manager bounce and hopefully capture something, and they see O'Neill with his history as the perfect person to do that. But no, I think it would be very ambitious and optimistic to say this is a long-term decision, simply because we've not had one of those since, the last manager to last more than a calendar year was Billy Davies. And that, to me, that feels half a lifetime ago.
Yeah, you get to sense, just talking from you there, that you're obviously kind of deeply emotionally invested in the club, but also you're kind of a little bit battle weary at this stage, and maybe thinking that O'Neill might be, painting the car a nice colour, but the car has a slightly dodgy engine in terms of where it's been going.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair. It should say it's a fairly expensive car. There's a lot of money been spent on this squad, so if someone can get it motoring, then there's a great deal of potential there, and there's a huge amount of potential at Forest. As I say, we're selling out home games. There's verging on nearly 30,000 every week at the City Ground, so there's certainly potential there. And what the new owners have done with the structure of the club, they have got a good mood behind there. It's just we need to see that reflected in some managerial long-termism, really. So
if the last question was, if it was kind of like a gun to your head, how long will Mark O'Neill be at Forest?
Less than 18 months, but that doesn't necessarily reflect.
That's long term nowadays.
Yeah, it is.
Daniel, thanks a million.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was Daniel Storey. We'll go to the ads now.